Hey there, Springs in the Desert community. I am Jillian, your podcast host, and I am so grateful to be here with you today. Before we jump into today's episode, I just wanted to talk with you a little bit about some of the conversations we've been having on the podcast. We have been highlighting a few different witnesses, a few different testimonies of stories from women, and we will likely continue to do that in the future because we hear from you so often that you really relate to other stories, and it helps you see how God is working through your story and how He is present in this season of infertility. However, some of these stories may not relate to your story, and that's okay. And so, if you're ever listening to a testimony that doesn't feel like it's maybe for you, I would just encourage you to hit pause and come back next week and listen to that, or go back to previous episodes and re listen to those. And if it is one that is particularly striking to your personal story, we would love to hear from you because we want to walk with you wherever you are at. And in particular, today's topic. I have just a dear, dear friend to the community, Clare Kane. I cannot wait to jump into this conversation. We're going to have several conversations with Clare coming up here. But many of these witnesses do talk a lot about medical trauma in many shapes and forms. And we know that so many in this community have experienced that.
Yeah.
And so today we have invited Clare to talk about intimacy after medical trauma and what that looks like. There are so many things, so many ways that medical trauma can affect our lives. And we wanted to focus a little bit on this question that we've been getting about intimacy between a married couple and what that looks like after medical trauma. So, Clare, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
I am well. Thank you so much, Jillian. It is always such a joy to talk with you and the whole team at Springs in the Desert. I'm so delighted to talk about this super important topic and to really kind of hopefully shine some light and some affirmation and validation on the very real experiences that so many people in this community have with this issue.
Thank you so much. I think, as I was preparing for this conversation, I was looking through my notes and I said, I kind of want to take us maybe one step back because sometimes, even I would say almost everyone on the team, one of the first things we kind of had to sort of accept or realize was that infertility is something to be grieved, that there is a real loss there. And that is something a lot of the community really wrestles with for a while, because I think sometimes from the outside it doesn't feel like it's a loss, that there isn't something tangible necessarily to kind of point to and say I lost this thing. And so in regards to medical trauma, I'm wondering, Clare, if you might be able to share maybe broadly, what is medical trauma? We do have, we're going to link in the show notes. We have a couple episodes about this, but to kind of get us all on the same page, what might be some experiences of medical trauma that our community may have experienced?
Well, I think that it's really important to sort of look at sort of the broad swath of experiences that people can have. Okay. So I think people think medical trauma, well, it has to be something enormous, some sort of a huge event. And for some people it is an event, the emotional response to which is so debilitating that it impairs function. Right. So sometimes it's that. Sometimes that's the loss of a pregnancy. Sometimes it's a DNC. Sometimes it's a hysterectomy, a partial hysterectomy, an oophorectomy. Like all of the different sort of procedures that might be part of this, part of someone's experience of infertility and or pregnancy loss. Sometimes, though, it can be small, cumulative losses that can kind of grow and become so weighty in the sheer repetition of them that, again, the emotional response to the gravity of them, starts to become debilitating and impairing for people in one or more facets of their life.
Well, I really appreciate that, because I think, again, while I was preparing for this and thinking about medical trauma, I hadn't even really, the listeners know I have had two losses, and I hadn't even really considered that a medical trauma. I yes, it was traumatic for me, but sometimes even, listeners, sometimes even the team, right? We have to have reminders of what the reality is that's happening. But I also appreciate that cumulative, because I think it can be easy to sort of dismiss those smaller instances that build. So that's really helpful to put into perspective. So if and maybe this might be a difficult question to answer. It's not one I'm sort of giving you this off the cuff because I am
No, that's
getting
okay.
my wheels spinning. Is there a way for someone to know, maybe they are in this sort of situation where they've been dismissing these smaller situations? How might someone be clued into the fact that what they are experiencing is in fact a trauma?
That's a great question, because I think sometimes the experience is we're sort of desensitized to it, especially if it's like a cumulative kind of growing, maybe a chronic repetition of some sort of clinical medical experience, right? Or if the situation in which we find ourselves for a grave medical experience, like a pregnancy loss, the people around us are somehow emotionally disconnected from the event. And we've talked about that in previous podcasts, that sometimes it is quite difficult to find medical practitioners who specialize in the care and keeping of people struggling with infertility who are emotionally connected to the man and woman experiencing this. Sometimes for their own sanity, self-preservation, they've kind of emotionally distanced themselves. So it's all very abstract. What I mean by that, some woman is miscarrying and she goes to her doctor, and everyone around her treats this as just a sort of like cold clinical medical event, right?
Mhm.
So oftentimes, we have things in our brains called mirror neurons, right? We have ways in which we are kind of crafted by evolution and design, right? Evolution and design to sort of read emotional cues from those around us. So if everyone around us is treating this as just sort of run of the mill, here's what we got to do. We're just going to soldier through this. These are the boom, boom, boom medical things. Somebody could exit that office after a loss of that gravity on so many different levels and be like, uh, I guess I'm done. I guess I'm just supposed to move on, because everybody in the room is just focused on the sort of the pragmatic medical task at hand. Not that that's not important, of course it is, but the emotional weight of an experience like that. And, to take it to, the other cohort of people, we talked about people who have experienced kind of cumulative medical trauma. It's the same kind of thing. If we're surrounded by people who are sort of casual about what is happening to us, it can be very difficult to sort of recognize, like, oh, wow. Yeah, I'm feeling fairly disconnected from myself. There's, to your question about how do I know that this might be affecting me in ways I don't realize. Do I sometimes notice that when I'm in that situation, it's hard for me to focus? Like I kind of go off somewhere in my head because it's so overwhelming emotionally, and the people around me are showing me that it's supposed to be apparently so casual and so run of the mill that I literally kind of check out a bit. That checked outness is often a very important symptom for people. Like, to give it its, clinical definition or clinical name, it's disassociation. Sometimes we get disassociate, and disassociation is a spectrum. So sometimes it's minor, like, this is uncomfortable. I'm going to sort of think about something else. But sometimes that I'm going to think about something else isn't a choice. It's like somewhere our mind goes to protect us. And then sometimes it's hard to come out of that. So
Mhm.
when you find yourself maybe struggling to sort of connect with your feelings after an experience in a doctor's office or one of these sort of medically traumatic experiences, one or two events or cumulative events, and you're kind of struggling to sort of connect with your body, connect with your emotions. Maybe it's making it harder to be present to the people around you, your spouse. Maybe you're starting to find yourself being very irritable for no particular reason. It's really interesting. Often, one of the major symptoms of trauma is irritability. And often it's because your brain is hypervigilant. There's so much stuff happening cognitively that is your part of your brain called your amygdala and your hippocampus are working extremely hard. They're sort of you have been put into fight, flight, or freeze. And oftentimes that will sort of make it harder to connect with your emotions. And there's so much going on cognitively and emotionally that the slightest extra stimuli, somebody forgets to take out the garbage, somebody cuts in front of you in traffic, all the lights are red and you're trying to get to work, and there's a disproportionate surge of anger. Yeah, those are important little, I need to pay attention. Not I need to worry, not I need to freak out that I've been traumatized and oh no, what do I do? Will I ever be better? But just start noticing, using your noticing brain to realize, to sort of pay attention and take your own emotional temperature a little more regularly as an important part of self-care.
That is very helpful, very extraordinarily helpful as I look back at some of the ways that I've reacted or responded to different situations after, appointments or events like that. So if that's what's sort of physically going on, how might that be affecting a woman or a couple and their identity or relationship to each other? What are some maybe wounds, if you will, that could be occurring then inside of someone or in their relationship?
Yeah, that's really important because I think it's really important to remember trauma doesn't happen in isolation, right? Because we're always in relationship, always already in relationship with those around us. And if you're married and you are experiencing this cross of infertility or loss, I would sort of lean into the fact that it's fairly likely that you have experienced a trauma in this way. I'm not going to generalize and say everybody's traumatized who experiences this, but I go almost that far, right? Because of, unfortunately, the way that sort of medicine is structured, the way that medical providers are often kind of forced by circumstance and necessity of how medicine is managed to sort of treat people this way. Not all practitioners, but many. It's really hard, I think, when it comes time to sort of look at the relationship, because if you have one person who has been through no fault of their own, thrown into this circumstance where all of a sudden they're disconnected from themselves. How in the world are you supposed to connect with someone else, especially in the level of intimacy? I mean, it's tough. Like, I just want to normalize and validate that for the people who are listening, for whom this is part of your experience. Like, the struggle is real, and the struggle is really a sign of your humanity. It's not something you're doing wrong. It's because you are an embodied person. And this particular kind of trauma, medical trauma, is all about the body, right? You are experiencing in your body things that are related to this great ambiguous grief of infertility and or pregnancy loss. And man, it's a lot. And so I think the first step is recognizing you're not alone. You're not doing anything wrong. In fact, you wouldn't be human if you weren't reacting this way. And to sort of normalize it. Okay, first, before, because I think sometimes, so much of the sadness and grief surrounding infertility is feeling like somehow our bodies have failed us. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so in some ways, this also feels like, well, my body has failed me again, right? Somehow my brain's involved. Now my brain's not working right. Right. So now it was the body and now it's my brain. Right. And then my emotions follow. And it's like, and I think people can end up feeling like they're a hot mess. It's like, no, you're not a hot mess. You are reacting normally to a grave injury to your person, grave injury to your person. So to start there is to start saying, it's okay, I'm acting this way. And for me not to act this way, or not to feel the depth of what's happening, would be a little abnormal. So, start at that place. And I think it's important to sort of involve spouses. If you are listening to this, spouse, and you suspect that your partner has experienced some sort of trauma in this way, like, I encourage you to, listen to this podcast, listen to some of the other podcasts that we've spoken about, and that definitely do some research just to sort of kind of create a space, a kind of soft landing for your partner of understanding, because this can feel very bewildering, right? Your spouse goes off to an appointment, comes back, and is a bit of a zombie and might
Mm.
take weeks, maybe, to come out of that, to sort of feel like themselves again. And it can be
Wow.
really bewildering for spouses who are not expecting this to happen, and they can feel quite helpless.
Mhm. That's all really so helpful. I'm always so appreciative, Claire, of how you create a space for everyone to be a team. The the person experiencing the trauma, the spouse, the medical team, because I think sometimes these conversations, or I should say it would be easy for these conversations to sort of pit,
Yeah.
spouses against the medical field or one
Yeah.
spouse against each other. And that's not what we are about. And
Yeah.
that's just not helpful. And that's not the reality. So I'm just so grateful that, you just the way you speak about each of those sort of partners, if you will, in this
Yes.
situation, that there are some things outside of their control. For instance, medical professionals, there's sometimes parameters and they can only do so much within the parameters
Yes.
they're given, and we're human and there's only so much that we can do within this
Yes.
biological physical body, right, that we've been
Hmm.
given, and to be aware of those things and to work with those things. I think that's so important to recognize. And so I think then, Claire, I think I would ask if a couple or maybe a spouse is realizing that this is perhaps what's going on, that there is some trauma, and which is very likely, as you said, in this community, and it's likely affecting all areas of their
Yes.
their marriage. What might be some ways, particularly intimacy, in all, right, all aspects. There's
Yep.
many ways for couples to be intimate. What are some ways to kind of begin healing, or sort of reclaiming what the truth is, or what the reality is about their marriage? How would they be doing that?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. I think some of the practical ways are, as you said, like intimacy in all its aspects, right? And I think sometimes the start, emotional intimacy, is really important to kind of start there, not necessarily even chronological, but kind of make that the priority, shall we say, right? Okay. So, and a lot of it has to do with sort of knowing your spouse. And if you don't know your spouse, or you're sort of like, I'm a little bewildered about how to help here, is to ask, saying, I'm noticing these things. Is that what your experience is? Ask that as a question, not just I'm noticing this. You gotta, fix it, or, like,
Yeah.
I'm noticing that. Is that what I'm seeing? Yeah, that kind of is. Okay. That's reasonable. I hear you. I hear you. Um, how can I help? Because I want to be here to help you. How can I help? Do you need a hug? Sometimes, interestingly, one of the best ways to sort of kind of, if you are feeling disembodied and dissociated, is to get full body pressure. And so sometimes, like, a super hard hug, like for 10 seconds or more, can actually be like it kind of reorients people in their body.
Oh,
That can
wow.
be very helpful. Other people are going to be like, I don't want you to touch me. Like, seriously, there will be no touching right now, right? I
No.
mean, no, there's none. And I'm not necessarily even talking about like provocative conjugal touching. I'm literally just like, I need to not be touched. Okay.
Yes, yeah.
What would be helpful? I just need you to sit beside me about 3 feet away while I sit and cry. Okay. I'm here for that. It's basically asking, what do you need? And then following through to the best of your ability, right? To the best of your ability. If the person says like, hey, I really need to like jet off to Paris tonight, be like, so I
Well,
hear you. I'm hearing that you feel like you need to get away. Okay. We can't do Paris. What can we do that's going to sort of replicate feeling like you need to be out of this space for a bit, right? Does that make,
mhm,
yeah. But it's
beautiful, yes.
literally asking, clarifying, like, here's what I'm noticing. Is that what's happening? Okay. What can I do to help? And if they
Mm,
say, and this often happens, I don't really know. Okay. I am just going to sit right over here. Okay. 10 minutes later, can I hold your hand? Yeah, you can hold my hand. Or no. Okay. Still sitting here. Still sitting here. I'm going to be reading my book, but I'm totally available. Sometimes just presence is really important. Okay,
Hmm.
so basically that building that kind of emotional intimacy and availability. And I think to the best of to the best of possibility, given people's obviously their family schedules, their work schedules, the other legitimate commitments they have, to make it clear to the spouse that their well-being in this moment is a priority. Kind of things stop. Other agendas, to the greatest degree possible, you have get shelved, not to gather dust again. I love Dr. John Gottman. I think in a previous episode, I called him Dr. John Goodman, conflating the wonderful actor John Goodman with the learned Dr. Gottman. Apologies, everybody. So Dr. Gottman, the amazing psychologist and marriage researcher, talks about shelving agendas. That when someone's in crisis, the other person may be like, but we needed to talk about finances. No, no, no. Those go on the shelf, not together dust forever, but because the other person is clearly in greater emotional need at this moment.
Wow. I'm just soaking this all in and asking the Holy Spirit to remind me of this, like maybe later tonight or tomorrow when I
Yeah.
yes, when I need that. It's so helpful because I mean, Claire, I could give you probably 100 examples just this week of when I think just a mixture of all this, when maybe something has been a little bit off-putting, and I think I even like is it possible to sort of like take the things off the shelf as the way of like distracting yourself from the
Oh,
thing?
fabulous question. Yes, 100%. That happens a lot. Like
Because I
all of
know
a sudden,
that's what I do.
yes. Oh my gosh, that happens a lot. Yes. So all of a sudden, it's the sort of like, when I was in grad school, all I did was procrastinate, right? Like I had papers to write. I had like reams of things to read. And what was I doing? I was baking soda bread at like 3 a.m. because that felt more important at that moment. It wasn't, right? But yes, we can 100% kind of like distract ourselves by reprioritizing in unhelpful ways, right? And
Wow.
reprioritizing in unhelpful ways, and one thing that has, this may not work for all marriages. I want to generalize. I don't want to generalize here, but one thing that my husband and I we use is the 15%. So when I was in a long, long time ago, when I was in the JP2 program, I lived with this wonderful woman, and she was dating this guy who has since became her husband. They have a lovely family. And she's like, I just really want to date a guy who lets me have my way 85% of the time. And the last 15%, he just like puts his foot down. I'm like, what do you mean? And she's like, no, just like, oftentimes I can make choices that I know aren't good for me because either I'm excited in the moment or I'm avoiding something. And that just 15% of like calling me back to the truth of what I need. Not in a domineering way, I'm not reading Ephesians 5 correctly
Yeah.
way. That's not what there's, not in a like, yeah, we're using a mutual submission framework here, right? But like that there is somebody there to sort of hold up a mirror to what is truly good for me, even if I'm like kind of gung-ho for something for whatever reason that I know isn't good. So there are times literally when I have tried to distract myself from some needed self-care because I have been trauma triggered in some way, right? Something has happened and has just sort of, stirred up a lot of dust in my heart. Everything's obscured, right? And there have been times when my husband has literally turned to me and been like, 15%. You need to go take care of yourself right now. Like, you need to go do
Wow.
this. I'm calling 15%. It's probably happened like maybe 25 times over almost 15 years of marriage. But it's
Wow.
important. Those times are kind of stop me in my track times. He's like, this is not good for you. You know that you really need to take care of yourself right now. And that has been enormously helpful. If that's helpful to anybody, I share that because, and I will say, he offers me the same thing. I do the same thing for him. Be like, babe, I can see some spiraling out of control. I'm gonna claim my 15% for you, but like, you need to go take care of yourself right now. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, I really love that sort of exercise or sort of call this sharingness too. I think, and I'm wondering if just a question that's rolling in my mind is if a couple, let's say, is already feeling distant
Yeah.
because of many things, right? And so that they're struggling with emotional intimacy and physical intimacy, and they really like this idea of this 15% sort of technique that you shared, but they aren't even feeling in it together yet. And
Yes.
and they're not even, they want to sit there and they want to hold their hand or give them that hug to kind of reorient them, but it just feels like so far away or just out of reach. What encouragement would you share to that couple?
That's a great question. Do what you can, not what you can't. Right? It's a great piece
Mm.
of advice that I got from a wonderful priest when I was in college and freaking out about something. Scrupulosity is an issue.
Mm.
And so
Mm.
I was freaking out about something confessional, and he just very calmly was like, love God as you can, not as you can't. And it was like one of those eureka moments,
Oh.
like, hello. Oh. I was like, oh. So I would say, like, do what you can, not what you can't. Check in with each other as you can. Um, you know, and I really think this is really important, maybe to hear for the spouse who has not experienced this trauma or who is simply traumatized in a different way. Okay. So that's something maybe for a different topic we can talk about when two traumas collide in a marriage, right? And that
Mm.
happens frequently. Um, is that it is 100% not the spouse's job to fix this. You can't fix it. And that is not something that is some sort of criticism. It's not something limiting for you, like, oh, you have this big limitation, you can't fix this. No, literally, you can't fix it. It would be impossible for you to sort of reach into that person's emotional experience and like toggle some switches and make them not feel these things. Okay. And the temptation is there because one of the hardest things I think in this life is to watch someone you love suffer and feel helpless to remedy it. And
Mm.
sometimes that helplessness can turn into frustration. And I'd say that's really important for the partner who maybe is seeing a spouse really suffering in this way, is to take your own emotional temperature. That is actually, and funnily enough, the best way that you can be present to the person is like, what am I feeling? Am I feeling so sad that I can't fix this? Okay, I am. Am I starting to get frustrated that they're still feeling this way because I can't fix it? Yes. Okay, that's a reasonable feeling. It's also not necessarily a place to stay or a wolf to feed that resentment, right? And it's okay to say it's really hard to watch you suffer. I'm here for it, but it breaks my heart. I wish I could fix this for you. That may be the opening that's needed to sort of create greater communion, is to a shared experience. This is tough for me. And I'm not, I think it's really important to like that balance of I'm not making this about me because what you're experiencing is your experience. But I need you to know that I'm with you and it breaks my heart to see you suffering. I'm here for what you need, even if it's sitting on the other end of the couch and I'm feeling a bit helpless, right? And I
Mm.
want to know better how to help. You don't have to tell me that right now. When
Mm.
you feel like you have a sense of how I can help, let me know because I'm here for it. Space. I think space,
Yep.
it's really interesting. Like this movement towards and from each other, sort of giving each other space often creates greater closeness. Yeah,
Mm.
it's very often the case. Yeah.
Wow, that's really helpful. I'm Before we close this episode, I'm all sorts of questions are now spiraling in my head, but I think it would be good to maybe speak to the couple who has tried that 15%.
Yeah.
They have tried these techniques and now they're feeling a little bit more confident in
Hmm.
their emotional and physical intimacy, but maybe have some nerves that it could sort of regress, and they maybe are afraid to
Hmm.
um, sort of take the next steps in growing in intimacy. And
Hmm.
what might you say to them in the desire to keep going?
That's a really great question. And I know, I feel like we didn't get much time to talk about the actual physical intimacy piece, which is really important. So maybe that's something I can sort of cap up here. Okay. So this is work, and it takes patience. And I say this not like you need to work. Literally, this is the vocation. It is being together in the moment. It is weathering the circumstance now, this present moment. And maybe this present moment is a night where your wife just recently had an appointment that just brought up, it rang every alarm bell her poor amygdala had, right? And she's come home, and it was hopefully a time when you guys could be physically intimate, right? I think the question would then be, is this what you need? Is this what you need? And I think especially within the context of, a marriage that is grounded in a sense of Christian love and sacramentality, oftentimes there is this, I feel like impetus, like we must make love. We must, right? And I think it's important to sort of take a moment there and say, is this something we both need right now? And if it's not, then maybe it's time to wait. Maybe it's time to hold each other tenderly. Maybe it's time to watch some silly, stupid TV show together while cuddled up and eating ice cream or whatever your sort of comfort food of choice is, right? Maybe it's time to sort of like the shelving of the agenda might be that. Other times it might not be. And I think that's, the great, the great Surveys Pinckaers, the moral theologian, said that virtue is creative. Right? It is going to look different in every moment. So the love within your marriage, the call to it is going to look different every moment. So sometimes it's going to look like we need to have a night of just cuddling and no conjugation, right? There may be another night when what we need in that moment is tender lovemaking as a way of sort of re-embodying each other and together, right? Like that is going to be the work of the moment to discern that for the couple. And I also want to put a shout out there to the benefit, if this is your experience, if you're listening to this and thinking, wow, this is describing some or maybe a lot of what my experience is in my marriage, I highly recommend seeking professional counseling help. And this is not because trauma is going to ruin your life and you're going to be blighted forever. Like, it is 100% possible to heal from trauma. It's also really helpful to have a safe space to share these things, to get some techniques and interventions that can help you feel more yourself, to really integrate this experience that has happened, or a set of experiences that have happened to you, and to sort of give you and your spouse some tools to be able to connect with each other more regularly, and to kind of like be more precise in stating your needs and recognizing the other person's needs, literally being more precise. So instead of being like, I guess she doesn't, because a lot of conflict in marriage in general, and when it comes to trauma especially, is assuming what the other person's intent is and what their feeling is. So that sort of framing of, I'm noticing this, is that what's happening for you? I mean, seriously, there have been marriages where just those two questions have like preserved and like renewed them, because instead of assuming something that's going on, the person has clarified and asked for the other person to literally like kind of share some of their autonomy. This is what I'm feeling. Okay, I'm here for it. I'm here for it.
That's really so helpful, because my next question was going to be, and of course, as you said, I think there's so many like specific examples that would be better discussed and worked out with a mental health professional, that they could really, dive into that. But I could foresee a couple who has maybe discerned, okay, what we do need tonight is to become one and to spend this time together. But there is this fear, or maybe even during the act or after, there's some difficulties that are being experienced. There's emotions that the other is maybe not quite sure how to respond to. And so would you say, Claire, again, without speaking into specifics, that those two
Yeah.
questions could be helpful in those moments to
Yes.
say, I'm noticing this. Is this what is happening for you? How can I be there for you?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think those sometimes I think sometimes the talking, the pillow talk, right? Which is a cliche for a reason. No, but it's really true. Like I think in a previous podcast, we laughed and called it debriefing because it kind of is, right? It's this, right? Like, which is kind of a cute joke, but also true. It's literally like, what happened? How were you feeling? How are you feeling? And is there something that needs to change either right now or for next time? Right. And that I think is just powerful to like have those experiences of connectedness before, during, after, and to sort of pay attention to each other. I think that's the biggest thing that sometimes, counseling often gives people permission to pay attention to themselves. And so therefore to be like more able to pay attention to another person. Because I think we spend one of the things that trauma can do is kind of make people flee from themselves. And that, is one of the, I think, most powerful things that, being in a relationship can help with. And especially in the case of someone who has had medical trauma, sometimes, counseling really can be a place where they can kind of meet themselves again.
Claire, I'm just so grateful for this conversation. I have received so much from what you have shared, and I really do think practically, listeners, that there are things that Claire shared, whether it's recognizing that trauma has occurred, what is emotional intimacy look like, and how can you build that? And physically, I think you gave some really great starting points, some great questions, and I love this idea of just giving space to our spouse, because in all of those, in each of those three sort of topics I just laid out, giving space, I can totally see where the closeness comes just
Mm-hmm.
after that.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful. Claire, before we wrap up, is there anything else that you would like to say on this topic?
I think just that I'm really grateful for this community at Springs in the Desert for the ways they provide space. They provide a safe space and really a haven, I think, for people who have had this kind of suffering, and to normalize it. I think sometimes that word is thrown around a lot, but to sort of affirm that the kind of feelings you're feeling, the struggles you're having are all normal for the abnormal situation in which you find yourself, and that there is hope and healing in that solidarity. So I'm just really grateful to be part of it.
Well, we're grateful that you're here, Claire. Absolutely. Listeners, don't worry. You're going to hear much more from Claire very soon. I am very sure that the community loves hearing from you just as much as I do, and so don't worry, that's coming soon. But listeners, please know that if you are finding yourself struggling a little bit with intimacy, particularly after a medical trauma, we'd encourage you to reach out. We have many friends in the community who are mental health professionals, and so we can try to connect you with one of them, or find someone who's near you who could help you talk through this situation or any other situation that you might need to or want to talk to someone about. But just know that we're here for you and we're praying for you, and we pray that this conversation will be a light to you in this season. So we'll see you next time.